You're listening to Latin America in Focus.
Latinoamérica en Foco.
América Latina em Foco.
A podcast by America Society, Council of the Americas on politics, economics, and culture in the region.
Hey listeners, this is your host, Karin Zissis of ASCOA Online, and this time around, we're happy to bring you a special edition of Latin America in Focus. We collaborated with the U.S Mexico Foundation to hear about empowering North American goals. In this episode, the Foundation's Managing Director, Enrique Perret, interviews our own President and CEO, Susan Segal, to get her insights on North American trade ties, cultural relations, and labor mobility.
Look at the United States today. Look at the world, but just look at the United States. We have inflation. What's part of driving that inflation? Lack of talent, lack of people. There aren't enough workers in this country to fill all of those jobs.
You'll hear about why the region offers a competitive advantage amid geopolitical uncertainties, as well as how to reframe the narrative around U.S. Mexico ties as the two countries prepare for 2024 presidential elections. Susan and Enrique also talk about the reasons why the 2026 World Cup in North America is so much more than a sporting event. In addition, we're pleased to share that Susan will be a co-chair at the North Capital Forum, a 3-day conference organized by the U.S. Mexico Foundation that takes place in Mexico City in October. Check the podcast notes for a link to find out more. As always, thank you for joining us. You can spread the word by sharing the series, writing us a review, and following us on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts.
1954 millas dividen, pero también unen a nuestros dos países. Bienvenidos a Proyecto 1954, un podcast para hablar sobre la relación México-Estados Unidos. Conduce Enrique Perret.
Welcome to a new episode of Proyecto 1954. I'm Enrique Perret. I'm the head of the U.S. Mexico Foundation. And today I'm going to talk with Susan Segal. She's the president and CEO of America Society, Council of the Americas. We're here in New York. I think this is the first episode, Susan, that I do in person after COVID. Happy to be in person with you here in your office. It's just amazing, this office.
Well, thank you. I am thrilled to be doing this in person because I don't like virtual podcasts.
Susan will be our co-chair this year for the North Capital Forum in October. She, along with Alejandro Ramirez from Mexico, Rob Wildebauer from Canada, and she's representing the U.S. in this case. And in this podcast, we're going to talk a lot about North America. We're going to talk about the relocalization of supply chains, the so-called nearshoring or ally shoring or friendly shoring. We're going to talk about the private sector and their role in all this. We're going to talk about the momentum that I think we are, as a region, gaining. We're going to talk about other barriers, but also opportunities and goals. So let me start, Susan, talking about, you are focused on the whole continent, the Americas, right? Is the Council of the Americas. But when somebody or someone talks about North America, what are the first thoughts in your mind when someone talks about North America?
Opportunity. North America is about opportunity. It is an opportunity for us to become the most competitive part or the most competitive area in the world. There's an opportunity not just for more integration of North America in many ways that we'll talk about, but I also have a much bigger vision that eventually we'll be able to integrate South America into that as well, which would make us the most competitive hemisphere in the world, not just the most competitive region. So when I think about this, I think about opportunity. I think about trade, I think about investment, and I think about more growth and better jobs for the peoples of North America.
So we have 30 years of integration, right? a formal, real rule-based integration in North America, U.S., Canada, and Mexico through the first agreement, right? Signing 94. Do you think that at that moment we saw an opportunity, right? President Clinton, Bush first, Clinton, President Salinas in Mexico, they saw an opportunity. Is the same opportunity now, or the opportunity change in many ways?
I think President Clinton and President Zedillo saw not just an opportunity, but saw a challenge. And I look at Mexico and U.S. Mexican relations and trade relations as a continuum from the mid-'80s, actually almost the beginning of the 80s, 83, but really through the mid-'80s to where we are today, more than 30 years, so 40 years. And the evolution of the relationship and the evolution of the integration and trade and opportunity. So when I think about what happened in 1994, remember we go back and we say, gee, the peso crash, lots of different things. And so NAFTA helped create an environment where there was stabilization in the hemisphere, right? Stabilization so that we could all grow and benefit. And if you look back over those last 30 years, you see that, Enrique. You see all of the opportunity, all of the growth in trade to $1.4 trillion. We're going to talk about that more, but why can't that be, 3 times that, 4 times that, 5 times that, over the coming years? And so to me, the opportunity to be able to invest and import or create product between the 3 markets and have seamless creation of the final product is so huge that it defies where we are and defines the opportunity.
We can talk a lot about problems, short-term problems, right? We can talk about security. We can talk about migration. We can talk water. We can talk about, many issues, many challenges. And it's fine because it's a big region. 500 million people living in North America. It's a big economy. It's a big border. So for sure, we're going to have issues all the time. But if we focus only on the problems, it's very hard to settle goals, right? It's like in a company. If you don't have the target number, market, sales, it's very hard to plan, in the short term and midterm. You mentioned $1.5 trillion. Why we don't have a goal of, I don't know, $5 trillion, $8 trillion for 2040. Why we haven't been able to set some North American goals on labor mobility, for example? We gotta, bring this, or in educational mobility, on infrastructure investment. But it looks like every year we're...
But that's why I like, Enrique, to think about where did we start 30 years ago and where are we today? Yes. And if you look at it that way, you say, well, we really did have goals, even if those goals in some ways weren't stated. Yes. So I think we should. There is no reason except that it takes time and effort and analysis and is ultimately political to set goals. My opinion, however, is that we should set goals. We should have aspirational goals that we're reaching for, because the aspirational goals that we're trying to reach for that can just be pulled out of the sky is what's going to drive productivity and drive economic growth for all 3 countries included in what used to be called NAFTA, which is TMEC, USMCA, whatever you want to call it. And so I think that this is a good time to set the goals. And part of the reason I think it's a good time to set the goals, you mentioned it earlier, is because of the friendshoring, nearshoring opportunity. And so, when we started this opportunity, or we started this journey, 30 years ago, we started and thought about Mexico as an opportunity to invest because, in fact, there was lower cost labor, and it was, the border, the three countries bordered each other, and we were all North America. Then we moved and we started to think about China. People went to China and other parts in Asia because it was cheaper. They thought it was more productive. They thought it was cheaper. But what's happened during the pandemic and during the war in the Ukraine, people realized that it's not just about cost. It's about security. It's great to say, oh, gee, it's 10% cheaper or 15% cheaper, which is all it really is after transportation, right? Or 20%. But it's another thing to say, I can't get that piece to make this product altogether. And so by moving the supply chain, or by creating supply chains, better said, in North America, we know that we don't have that problem. And we know how to move product. Because you think about an automobile, that different pieces as you make that automobile cross the border 5 times, 6 times, 10 times, cross all 3 borders to make a successful automobile. We know how to do this, and we know that we can do it, and we know that we don't have security issues, and that we can get the product. And to me, that's what's critical today. So this, I think, will redefine the opportunity and should redefine our vision as we look to the next, not just 5 years, but as you say, 10 years, 20 years. This should redefine our vision.
Let me talk a little bit more about the narrative of North America, because setting goals also helps to create, this aspiration of a region. And for new generation, I remember, Susan, so the NAFTA agreement was signed in 94. I decided my professional career in 97, and I decided to study international business, international commerce, right? I studied back in Monterrey. It was the trend to study international business because the goal was to involve Mexico in the international arena. Globalization was at that time. Now we talk more about regionalization than globalization. And regionalization is North America again. But how can we set the narrative, not only for us, people who is listening to this podcast, probably they're knowledgeable about the integration and the products, how to create this aspiration of North America to new generations?
I think we have to think about it in terms of opportunity, in terms of making North America the place for growth and opportunity, not just for us, but for our children. And I think we have this enormous market that we have. The demographics of the labor demographics of Mexico. We have the largest consumer market in the world in the United States. And we have, Canada, which has incredible high-tech, great labor force as well. And so, but we always set the narrative as, USMCA is taking something away from someone. So people don't think about it that 1 + 1 or 1 + 2 + 3 equals 10. We have to redefine the opportunity, and not just the opportunity in terms that you and I learned in school about trade, etc. We have to redefine this and what it means to the peoples of North America. And then I think people will understand it a lot better.
Proyecto 1954, el podcast con Enrique Perret.
What are the biggest needs right now for a country like the U.S.? Right now, I feel that the U.S. has some needs in which Canada and Mexico can, complement. You mentioned national security, and I think that's a biggest need of the U.S., right? To create this environment of security against, and I say against.
It's not really against.
It's not against, but it is a race. No, it's a tech race.
It's a tech race on one level, but it's also just the ability to make sure that populations have what they need, whether it be food, whether it be component parts, whether it be precious metals. Why should metals be mined in our country, sent to China to be refined, and then exported back to the United States? No, we should be able to do all of that in North America and, frankly, South America.
So national security is one of the needs. What else? Is talent a need right now?
I think talent at every level is a need. Look at the United States today. Look at the world, but let's look at the United States. We have inflation. I don't know if it's 4%, 5%, 10%, whatever it's not 10%, 4 or 5%. We have inflation. What's part of driving that inflation? Lack of talent, lack of people. There aren't enough workers in this country to fill all of those jobs. And frankly, that's because throughout history, the United States has had an open arms for immigrants. So immigrants always fill the marginal jobs or the jobs at the margin of this country. And now we don't do that. We've closed our border. So let's think about something new and innovative. What about an ultimate goal of a free flow of labor? But let's start on a much smaller scale. Let's talk about visas, easy visas for specific jobs at any level. They could be high-tech jobs, but they could also be the dishwasher, in a restaurant. Why should our companies only be able to work 4 days a week, a lot of service companies, because they can't find labor, when in fact there is labor, right? And so I think there is so much opportunity throughout the markets for labor. And that could be labor going from the United States to Mexico to run a plant, or labor going from Mexico to the United States or Canada going to Mexico. So I think that, we need to do many things. And one of them is to create easier labor mobility between the different countries. You can do that in phases, you can do that in steps, but easier access to labor mobility is critical. The other thing is, too, that while we've moved USMCA forward, I'm talking about, or TMEC forward, what we haven't done is unify a lot of the regulatory processes and a lot of the barriers to trade. And I think that's another really big vision that we need to think about. How do we make it easier, right, to not just create products, but then as you go up the scale, so not just to build a car, but as you go up the scale in technology and technological products, how do we unify some of these rules and regulations? How do you cross the borders more easily? How do we make transit completely seamless?
Let me take this point on labor, because once you have labor mobility, people moving in the region, you're also moving families, you're moving cultural stuff. And I want to touch on culture. We're here in New York. I think this is a more and more Hispanic city. Obviously, Hispanic, 60%, 65% of Hispanic people in the U.S. is Mexicans or Mexican Americans. Tell me a little bit about this change or this momentum also of the cultural integration in the region.
Well, let me start by saying we're sitting in the Americas Society, which was founded by David Rockefeller. And he believed strongly that culture drove better understanding among the peoples of the Americas. And in fact, you were sitting in an office off a library that has Mexican furniture in it that was donated by a Mexican private sector leader long before my time, and I promise you long before your time, when the house became ours in the late 60s or the mid 60s. So I believe strongly in that vision that culture drives better understanding. And so as you think about cities, and you think about Chicago, you think about Los Angeles, you think about New York, but you think about other cities. I mean, I went to Santa Fe, New Mexico. Santa Fe, New Mexico was Mexican before it was part of the United States, and Mexican culture is everywhere. And I think that, frankly, when you go to New Mexico, they celebrate that culture. And we should be celebrating the fact that we can integrate cultures, and with that integration, understand and create an even better culture, a North American culture that integrates how we think, art, music, literature, and what we do every single day, respecting each other.
As you know, we have this narrative that comes out of the North Capital Forum, that is the North American way. Do you think, and for us, for me, the North American way is this mindset, this chip of doing things in North America, either business or family or universities, but doing things in a North American way. I grew up in the border, right? In a border region. For me, it was always like bilingual, bicultural. I was from here, but from there. I crossed the Rio Bravo River every day. So it is easy for me to understand the North American way. But do you think the North American way, it's a thing, could be a thing, and how to improve that mindset?
Well, I think if you and I sit here and think that we want the North American way, we will always agree that there should be a North American way. And if you and I go to Canada and we talk to people of similar demographics, in Canada, they'll always think there should be a North American way as well. But creating a North American way is intensely political. So what we need to do from a cultural perspective, not from a manufacturing perspective, because people understand when you talk about, well, we're going to manufacture in 3 countries, we're going to create jobs in 3 countries, we're going to create a better and cheaper car, we're going to create a better television. People get that, right? Because that affects them. When you talk about the melting of cultures, which is something we in the United States should feel super comfortable with, because we are a melting pot of cultures since the very beginning. But somehow it has become more political. And so I think we have to, on the cultural side, we have to repackage and resell this and make people realize that the North American way doesn't threaten anybody or anything, but makes us all better, right? Makes us citizens of not just our own country, but of the 3 countries. And that is an amazing opportunity for all of us. I mean, why shouldn't anybody in the United States be able to travel to Mexico, cross the border, and go on an amazing vacation? Or why shouldn't a Mexican be able to come and go on an amazing vacation? Or a U.S. citizen or a Mexican citizen go and spend time at a place like Whistler or Lake Louise in Canada? I mean, these are just amazing places. Again, coming back to mobility and acceptance, that it would be great to be able to think about it in the broader way. But I think we have to repackage and resell what it is.
We're going to have a tremendous excuse to showcase North America in 2026. That is the World Cup, right? And more than soccer, it's just the biggest event in the world, right? The biggest attention of all the continents watching, games. And your idea, and your best idea, or your dream, how should we showcase North America 2026 for millions and millions of people in the world?
Across every medium we can think of. Traditional television, the internet, social media, but most of all, we should encourage North American participation. We should allow people, as you said, to cross the border, to come to the events, to maybe go to different events in different countries, all during the same, World Cup. So I really think, and I think the presentation of North America, think about this, what an amazing opportunity, not just to showcase, one country, but to showcase North America as an entity with the World Cup is just really cool. And particularly since the biggest soccer star in the world has just agreed to come to Miami.
Yeah. I don't know if he's gonna play another cup, but anyway, you have it here in Miami, and I think the prices to go and watch a game at the Miami are getting high and high, competing with Taylor Swift.
But what
a concert of Taylor Swift.
I agree with that. But what it is going to do, Enrique, which is incredible, is again, soccer has become incredibly popular in this country, but it's going to make soccer even more popular in this country, which I think, it's always been popular in Mexico. It's popular in Canada, but not like Mexico. So all of a sudden, you're going to have all three countries have soccer right, in front of them, right, being such a popular sport. So I think it's an opportunity to really showcase North America in its presentation.
Sports diplomacy, right?
Right.
Let me finish with a question of the elections, 2024.
Which elections?
Well, Mexican and the U.S. We have two elections every 12 years. I think it's every 12, every 10, every 12 years we have elections and presidential elections in both countries. But there is a temptation for politicians to talk about the relationship between Mexico and U.S. in both sides. How can we, from the private sector, from the civil society, from the think tanks, how to protect the relationship from a bad narrative coming from campaigns?
That's a very important question, actually. I think it goes back to something, Enrique, we said at the very beginning of this very important conversation, which is we have to define it in the benefits that people are getting. The jobs, the quality jobs, so that people don't feel threatened. The growth that we're getting in the country, hopefully lowering inflation because we have a little bit more labor mobility. But I think we have to define the relationship and the trade that we do in this country. And we have to explain to people why this is good for national security, why this is good for people getting better paying jobs, why this, is better for our children, why people can feel not less secure, but more secure because we have North America. And if we can do that, then I think it and change the narrative, then I think people aren't going to feel threatened. People are going to come in and say, gee, this is something that we have to continue to grow, and we have to really get behind the vision for North America and make it's happening, but make it happen even more quickly. This amazing, the opportunity for more integration and more growth and more security against that backdrop is enormous. I think it's so large that it's even hard to define it. And part of it is because it's not just economic terms, it's cultural terms, and it's long-term opportunity for you, your children, and my children.
So I think that's the quote of the podcast. I love your passion on this, Susan. You're gonna be with us in Mexico City, October 4th, 5th, and 6th for the North Capital Forum, being our co-chair. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I am so looking forward to the North Capital Forum and to be in Mexico those days. I love Mexico. It's one of the countries where I really started my career. And so for me, Mexico is a very, very special place. And North America is a very special opportunity. So thank you.
Thanks for listening. I'm your host, Karin Zesses. Luisa Lemmy is our executive producer. The music in the intro and outro of this podcast was recorded for America's Society. Find out about upcoming concerts at musicoftheamericas.org. Learn more about our podcast series by checking www.as-coa.org/podcast. And check the podcast links for more notes, links, and ways to be in touch with feedback. Thank you.